Okay, welcome. So just to begin by welcoming everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be associated with this event with the Colombian Embassy. And we're going to begin by asking our Chief Executive, Naoimh McNamee, to open proceedings along with the Colombian Ambassador, Patricia Cortés. Maybe begin with Naoimh to maybe say a few words of welcome to all of those who are joining us online today.
Thanks, Pat. Colleagues, friends, Ambassador Cortés. This event is to acknowledge that it is now 5 years since the Colombian Peace Agreement, and we were delighted to be asked by Ambassador Cortés to partner with the Colombian Embassy in Ireland. We're particularly glad to be joined by Eamon Gilmore and Emilio Archila from Colombia. As Irish citizens, we are very proud of what Eamon has achieved in his role to the Colombian peace process, along with his role as an EU representative for human rights. On behalf of Glencree, I would just like to wish the event well and to say that it's just the start of what we hope will be a closer collaboration between Glencree and our friends in the Colombian Embassy. So thank you very much, Ambassador Cortés.
Thank you, Naoimh. And Ambassador Cortés, if you want to maybe begin.
Well, buenos dias in Colombia, good afternoon in Ireland, Brussels, in Europe. Thank you, Naoimh. Thanks a lot to the Glencree Center for partnering with us in organizing this event. I'm very grateful to all our panelists today, Eamon Gilmore, EU Special Envoy for the Peace Process, and EU Special Representative for Human Rights. Most importantly, great friend of Colombia. He just visited Bogotá and Antioquia a couple of weeks ago. Emilio Archila, Presidential Counsellor for Stabilization and Consolidation, coordinates the implementation of the agreement under the Peace with Legality policy in Colombia. We had a pleasure of welcoming him in his visit in 2019, and he's always kind and to attend. He's joining us virtually very early hour in Colombia. And of course to Fergal Mythen, Assistant Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs. He has many responsibilities, among many, the implementation of the Good Friday follow-up and the promotion of peace and reconciliation in the island of Ireland, and soon to be Irish Ambassador in New York. Thanks to all attendees today, and I especially want to thank and acknowledge the presence of Irish Ambassador in Bogota, Fiona Nick Donaha. I have to acknowledge as well the presence of former Ambassador Alison Milton. The last 24th of November marked the 5th anniversary of the signing of the peace agreement with FARC in Colombia. In coordination with the UN mission and the institutions implementing the agreement, the Colombian government organized several events with the participation of victims, transitional justice systems, civil society, political parties, and representatives from the international community. Of course, among them, Eamon Gilmore and UN Secretary General, who visited Colombia by invitation of course, of the country. And during these events, there was a clear recognition of the impressive progress of implementing the agreement by the parties and the commitment of the Colombian government and the current peace with legality. I want to highlight one or some of the messages mentioned by Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General. He said today, Colombia is a symbol of peace in the world, and it's time to keep investing in peace in Colombia. We all know that this is a journey that should take, in the case of Colombia, 15 years minimum to do for the whole implementation. We also know that there are challenges, of course, that we are addressing them, and we are also aware and recognize the importance of the role of the international community on this implementation. The Colombian government, this embassy, highly value, of course, the support of Ireland in the implementation, the interest in Ireland for this process, and of course, the contribution of Irishman and former Taoiseach Eamon Gilmore. We also trust in Ireland's constructive approach because of the understanding and sharing lessons in its own journey on peace implementation. Finally, I want to express my special gratitude to Glencree Center, particular Pat and his team of Christeri and his team for collaborating with the embassy in organizing this event in the framework of the 5th year anniversary of the signing of the 2016 peace agreement. To allow, I think, all of us a more profound understanding of this journey. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you. And as has been alluded to, I mean, peace processes, and we can speak from our own experience here in Ireland, they are long and they are challenging, and they throw difficulties along the way. And you're 5 years since the signing of the agreement, which, when I reflect, and Fergal and Eamon will recall, 5 years into our process, we were hitting some speed bumps in the road and so on. So it's these processes are journeys, and they take on many forms and so on. But just to once again thank everybody, and to thank Dr. Archila and Eamon Gilmore and indeed Fergal for their agreed participation. I'm going to maybe begin, and then we can have questions from the general audience as we go along. But maybe to begin, an opening question to Emilio first, and ask him. You've been to the forefront of the efforts in the last number of years in this process. Would it be possible for you to identify what you've seen as some of the big achievements and some of the challenges in front of you as you navigate your way forward through all of this?
Sure. And first, let me start by thanking you all for organizing this meeting, and for the interest that Ireland has shown in our process. You have appointed very remarkable ambassadors during this time, so I have been working very jointly with them. It is a good time to make a special recognition to Eamon Gilmore. He is not only a remarkable diplomat, and his profound knowledge of the human conflict has been very useful and enlightening, not only to me but to President Duque. So this is a good opportunity to thank you for your continuous interest in our process. I will start by recalling that most of the peace processes drop during the first years of implementation. So more than half of the attempts that have been made by all humans have failed before achieving the time that we have reached. This process has not only reached 5 years, 3.5 years of President Duque implementation through its policy of peace with legality, but it has its roots profoundly grounded, and it has started to produce results in a way that I have no doubt that when the next government starts in August 2022, there will be no possibility for anybody that comes to the presidency else than continuing what we have done, surely in their own way. The aim of a peace process is to eliminate or to reduce violence. And we have done very good in that. If you look at what is happening in Colombia without the passionate of the political discussion, Colombia, as it has been described by the Security Council, is by far a better place to live than it was before we started the implementation. And that is true because the killings are less, the kidnappings are less, the terrorist attacks are by far less. We have much fewer personal mines and so. Now, the reality is that when we signed the agreements with the FARC, there were a lot of other violent groups. The ELN was out there, Pelusos was out there, Clan del Golfo was out there. puntilleros were already there, and this was made even tougher because of the dissidents. There are people that never went into the process. There are not people that entered the process, but they never went into the process. So it should have been clear for Colombia and the world that the implementation was very relevant, and it is very relevant to obtain a sustainable and permanent peace in Colombia, but it was not enough. It was always clear that we needed to work with those other violences. So I will highlight that we have much better figures in all aspects of violence, but we have some work to do. In what has to do with the implementation, the advances are, in my opinion, but obviously it's my job, but I think that they are remarkable. We have received from President Duque a three-pillar instruction. He has mentioned that we needed to have a political statement so that it will be clear for Colombians and for the world that in all aspects we will comply with the agreements. Second, we would take an advantage that the implementation is foreseen in a 15 years period. And let me highlight that, because in implementing, we are getting over a lot of issues that Colombia should have addressed decades ago, with or without the agreements, but that cannot be resolved in 4-year period of each presidency. So we indeed devoted a lot of time to make this long-term planning. And third, we needed to produce results, to produce accomplishments, so that at the end of this year of 2021, this will become a non-reversible process. And we have done that. We have done that in the democratic participation by granting and assuring that the ex-combats are in the Congress. And at this moment, we are in the implementation of the post for the victims, so that they can also be represented in the Congress. We have done that by assuring the independence and the founding for the transitional justice. We have done that for the victims. Victims are in the center, in the core of our work. We extended the victim law for another 10 years so that we can work in supporting these 9 million Colombians. We have made the most of the advancements in individual reparations and in collective reparations. This is a Colombian creation that exists only in our process. It goes to resolving resolving the cases when the attacks were made to a collective, like because of being woman or because being indigenous, and so we have the biggest budget for that. We have 13,000 ex-combats with the extension of all guarantees that should be granted for them. Bear in mind that everything was going to come to an end in 2019, and we made it that extension by law, so that we can accompany them for as long as it is needed, so far as long as they remain within the reincorporation process. In that, more than 99% of them are already in the banking system. More than 85% of them are within the Colombian health system and the Colombian pension fund system. We have granted stable jobs or economic projects for more than 8,000 of them. And this is in 3 years, and obviously we will continue to do that. We have the most successful COCA voluntary substitution program ever. This is 100,000 families. This is 400,000 Colombians that, due to the support of the Colombian government, have been able to abandon the coca growing and are now with in legal and sustainable economic projects. In what has to do with the stabilization of the most affected parts of Colombia, this is 1/3 of the country. And Colombia is a very, very big country. These 170 municipalities are huge areas. It is the same population as Bogotá. It is 6.6 Colombians. We have made the planning, we have made the coordination so that the nation, the departments, the municipalities, the international community, the private sector focus their efforts in making those areas to come to the same level of development as the rest of Colombia. At this moment, we are executing 11 Colombian billion pesos. This is 12 zeros pesos, 12 zeros billions. This is the same cost as the first line of the Bogotá, the Metro of Bogotá. And the Metro of Bogotá is going to be the biggest investment in Colombia ever, and it's a debt that is going to be paid for 40 years. And at this moment, we are executing that amount of social and infrastructure investment in those municipalities. In what has to do with the rural reform, this is the biggest challenge. We needed to produce 16 long-term plans. We have produced 14. We received just 2. We have produced 16 in all areas, in the multi-purpose catastrophe, in the land bank, in distribution of land, in what has to do with roads, health, education. We have advanced by far more than what it was expected to be advanced in 3.5 years in a implementation program that is foreseen to last for 15 years. So I do think that we have responded to the Colombians and we have honored this challenge of continuing to be an inspiration for other peace process around the world.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Thank you. Eamon, can I put generally the same kind of question to you, a seasoned observer of our own process here, and then as Foreign Minister, dealing with some of the challenges, as you know, Emilio has mentioned, even around legacy and the run of the Stormont House. Now, what is your own sense of the achievements and challenges that maybe remain? Just on mute there, yeah.
Thanks, Pat, and thank you for the invitation to Glencree and for your welcome remarks, Niamh. And let me acknowledge the great work that Ambassador Patricia Cortés is doing on behalf of Colombia in Ireland, and of course the great work that Ambassador Fiona Niconica, succeeding Ambassador Alison Milton, is doing on behalf of Ireland in Bogota, and good to be joining you too, Fergal, and of course Emilio. It's great to see you again after just on this occasion just a 3-week lapse since I was in Colombia and had the pleasure of your company on that occasion. You asked, Pat, about comparing Colombia with Northern Ireland. It's difficult to make a straightforward comparison because the nature of the conflicts very different, the scales are very different, and of course the context. But there are certainly parallels. And when I was appointed to the role of Special Envoy for the peace process in Colombia by Federica Mogherini, the then High Representative of the European Union, part of her thinking at the time was my knowledge and experience of the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and the process in Northern Ireland. I should say that there has been a very strong interest by Ireland in peace building back over the years. Long before I ever became involved with the peace process in Colombia, I'm thinking in particular about the interest that many civil society organizations, church bodies, trade unions, parliamentarians, development agencies had in Colombia, and kept the issue of the conflict and kept the issue of the necessity for peace building and a peace process very much on the agenda. And I think that the many Irish people who contributed to that should not underestimate the contribution that they have made to laying the foundation for the Colombian peace process. As Emilio mentioned, I was in Colombia 3 weeks ago for the 5th anniversary events, which were attended by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. He was there for 2 days, and I had the honor of accompanying him and accompanying the President and Emilio to many of the events, and to speak at them on behalf of the European Union. And I think that it was a very good week for the peace process in Colombia, because I think it did a couple of things. Firstly, I think it enabled everybody to reflect on what has been achieved. The peace agreement put an end to what was the longest and bloodiest conflict in the Americas in the 20th and 21st century. Lasted 53 years, claimed the lives of 250,000 people. 100,000 people still missing. 6 million people driven from their homes. 10 million victims. And that has been brought to an end. FARC have disarmed. You asked for the comparison with Northern Ireland. The disarmament of FARC took 7 months. The disarmament of the IRA took 7 years. It was a remarkably more successful disarmament process. The reincorporation of FARC, and Emilio has described some of the achievements on that front. It's an area where the European Union has very actively and financially supported. 90% of those who were involved in the conflict have remained in the process. There are dissidents, of course. I think it's always to be expected in any process of this kind, and as we know from our own experience. The transitional justice system, which had a rocky enough start, is now well embedded. The Truth Commission will present its report about the middle of next year. The HEP, which is the body that examines the activities of different actors during the conflict, for example, handed down a remarkable finding, a remarkable judgment in respect of the collective leadership of FARC during the conflict, in which they found them guilty of crimes against humanity. And it's accepted by the majority of those FARC leaders, overwhelming majority of those FARC leaders who were affected by it. The start of the rural development process, for which Emilio, I think, deserves great credit for the work that he has put into to that. And of course, the recent decision that the 16 seats in the Congress, which were set aside for the areas and the communities most affected by the conflict, that will go ahead in next year's elections. The Kroc Institute in Notre Dame University, which has the responsibility of measuring the progress of the implementation of the agreement, in its last report says that 30% of the provisions of the agreement have now been completed, fully implemented. Another 18% are at an intermediate stage. Further 37% have been commenced, but admittedly, some of those are at a very early stage. What it does tell us is that a lot has been done, but there is still a lot more to do. And I think one of the things that happened during the week marking the 5th anniversary was what I called leaving behind the language of failure, because right through the 5 years, we'd heard periodically that the Colombian peace process is failing. The Colombian peace process is a success. It's a success with difficulties and with challenges, as all peace processes have. And if I could just maybe identify some of those challenges. The first and biggest, it relates to the violence that is still taking place, particularly in remote parts of the country. Colombia has one of the highest number of killings of human rights defenders anywhere in the world. High number of killings of social leaders, former combatants, 300 who have been killed since the start of the process. So there is most urgent task which has to be worked upon is the addressing this violence in the remote parts of the country. Emilio listed the various groups which still remained in existence after the conclusion of the agreement with FARC. When one puts together FARC dissidents, those that have been newly recruited, ELN, Clan de Golfo, all of the different other illegal organizations, many of them associated with the drugs trade and with the illegal economies, there are around 10,000 people still in Colombia illegally holding weapons. And that poses a continuing threat to the society. The second issue, and it's related to that, is the drugs trade and other illegal economies, but I think principally the drugs trade. There is no escaping the fact that the coca crop has grown, has increased. Emilio mentioned the crop substitution program, which is provided for in the agreement. And yes, it is great that 100,000 growers are in that program, but there are still many, many growers who are not part of it. And there's very significant intimidation of those who want to become part of it. And I think that and I'm expressing here a personal opinion rather than the collective view of the European Union or any policy position which has been, I don't think Colombia can deal with this drugs problem on its own. And I don't think that the drugs problem in Colombia can be dealt with solely from the supply end. I think there is a demand dimension to illegal drugs, and in particular to cocaine, that can only be dealt with or can most effectively be dealt with in Europe and in North America, where the biggest markets exist for cocaine. The reality is that every line of cocaine leads ultimately to some very often young person, some human rights defender somewhere in Colombia having their life put at risk. And I think that this is an area I think that we need to give more attention to on this side of the Atlantic and also in North America. On rural development, and again, great credit to Emilio for the work that he has done in advancing the PDETs. As he said, it's a 15-year program. There's 10 now more to go. So therefore, I think that in the elections next year, I think that one of the issues, I think that it would be interesting to hear candidates reflect on will be the question of the resourcing of the rural development, because a lot of this is to do with infrastructure for which there has to be a lot of advance planning and so on. And finally, I would say the role of the international community. I was struck in Colombia 3 weeks ago at the recognition that there was in all quarters, government, civil society, right across the board, about the importance of the support of the international community for the implementation of the peace agreement. And this is something that we know here in Ireland, because we know, for example, the importance of the support that we got from the United States in particular, but also from the European Union, which invested very significantly in peace programs in Northern Ireland. And I think this, more than for anybody, I think is a success for the United Nations. The role that the UN has played, all of its agencies, in the building of peace in Colombia, but particularly the UN mission led by Carlos Ruiz Massieu, I think has been Trojan, and it was something that I was very pleased to be able to say directly to the Secretary General when I was there, that I think that the UN can take great credit for the work that has been done.
Thank you, Eamon. Quite stark and sobering figures, and it shows you the scale that the conflict was at, and the achievement of the process in ending that level of violence and the huge loss of life and so forth. Fergal, can I turn to you as a seasoned, very experienced diplomat, particularly at the peace process level here in Ireland, Anglo-Irish relations and so on. And maybe in your own terms, maybe give a sense of the role that and the contribution that Ireland has made to the Colombian peace process, and other particular experiences in our process that might lend themselves to being shared further in terms of the challenges that both Eamon and Amelia have outlined.
Thank you very much, Pat. Firstly, just want to thank Patricia and the entire Colombian Embassy team and Glencree Centre, for Naoimh and yourself, Pat, for organising this event and for the invitation to me to speak on behalf of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Also very, very happy to join Eamon and Dr. Emilio, who are making a huge contribution to the peace process in Colombia. I might just start by just acknowledging how good relations are and how they've developed between our two countries in recent years. Colombia opened its embassy in Dublin in 2018. We opened ours in 2019. But as Eamon says, the relationship goes back much deeper than that, many years before that, both in terms of civic society, but also at governmental level. And it's for us opening the embassies in both countries has just really solidified that relationship. And I want to acknowledge the work of our former ambassador Alison Milton and our current ambassador Fiona Ní Donnchadh in that space. It's looking at this moment, 5 years into the Colombian Peace Agreement. It's really important to mark that moment. It's really important to mark the successes. I think Eamon put it very, very well there. It's a success with difficulties. And I think that sums up the Northern Irish peace process, and it sums up the Colombian peace process. And that's an extraordinary achievement in both instances. And we shouldn't minimize that. To get there, to build relationships, to build a level of trust, to build a process, to get into talks, to achieve agreement at talks level, and then to reach an agreement, and then to implement that, through setbacks, through frustrations, through disappointments, is a really, really important achievement. And it's really, really important to mark that and not take that for granted in either of our countries. Not take that for granted. Peace is never a given. It was not a given in Northern Ireland. It was not a given in Colombia. And it is important to mark that, while acknowledging there occasionally are difficulties or there are challenges ahead. And as Dr. Emilio said, it's a long-term 15-year implementation process. So I suppose want to start by congratulating the Colombian government, the various stakeholders in the peace process, and the people of Colombia itself for that achievement. I'd like to just reflect a bit on our own peace process, because that's my area of expertise. I started working in the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1990. I started working on the peace process, or what was the very starting point of the peace process. Then I've spent half my career dealing with it, and it really has been a process. And I'd like to explain that by showing you two publications. This here is the Good Friday Agreement. It's 35 pages. It's a very simple, straightforward, short document, fundamental, transformational, but brief. Here then is a recent publication funded by my department, written by Justice Richard Humphreys, and it brings together all the agreement between the British and Irish governments over 40 years, starting with Sunningdale in 1973, right up to the most recent agreement, New Decade, New Approach in 2020. 40 different agreements to start, kickstart, restart, re-energize, and take the peace process forward. And I think that shows you just what a process is. A good colleague of mine and of yours, Pat, Tim O'Connor, he was part of the Irish delegation in Belfast in 1998. He often speaks of the messiness of peace building, the messiness. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. It takes effort. It takes time. And I think that's the one lesson we bring from our own experience. And it's a lesson of encouragement. And I know we've often engaged with Colombian figures, and it's a lesson that we've wanted to share because it is important. And in a sense, to have a duty of hope, a sense of hope, even when things take a bit of a setback, as can happen in every occasion. For us, I suppose we've always known, every conflict is different. And Eamon there set out the scale of the conflict in Colombia, the years of misery and mayhem and murder. Just, it's on a scale that perhaps is way beyond in sheer, numbers what happened in Northern Ireland. And yet, both both conflicts left awful damage in their wake and were equally intractable. And at times, you know, it was easy to give up hope and imagine that there was no way through. For us, it took a lot of effort on the part of an awful lot of people. Yes, two governments, yes, all the political parties, but also stakeholders, women involved in peace building in their communities, people at the ground level, slowly engaging in conversations, slowly building up trust. So when we look at 1998, we look at the Good Friday Agreement, we see a moment in time which brought all that together, but wouldn't have been possible without all the work that went in beforehand. And when we look at now at Northern Ireland, and yes, there are difficulties, undoubtedly, but Belfast is a world away from the Belfast I first visited in 1990 in part of my work as Foreign Affairs. It's a changed place, it's a changed landscape, and that has been through not just the Good Friday Agreement, but all the work and effort and negotiations since then to keep things on track, to adjust and tweak where necessary, to ensure everybody was on board. I think reflecting back on the Good Friday Agreement, I suppose what were important were the principles that underpin that process. You know, and I think it's worth recalling those principles because I think they do have value in other peace processes. One, that violence or the threat of violence could play no part. That equality, mutual respect, and human rights were essential components of a just and lasting peace. And again, Dr. Emilio spoke about a sustained peace, a long-term peace. That's very, very important. Likewise, that the eventual peace agreement would be comprehensive, involve all relevant issues and all relationships, and that the outcome will be put to the people of the island, North and South. And finally, that the future of Northern Ireland was for the people of Northern Ireland alone, the principle of consent. So those principles underpinned all that followed when you look at the different issues, the political architecture of Northern Ireland, the governance, decommissioning, as Eamon spoke about, human rights, policing reform. They were all built on those principles, which I think no matter what we looked at in subsequent implementation agreements, those principles underpin that and continue to underpin peace and stability to this day. I think another learning that we drew from the peace process was that the process can transform the participants, that by entering into negotiation, by entering into conversations, people and parties and organizations and stakeholders coming from very, very different perspectives do change as they go through the process. Not that they leave their deeply held positions behind. That was never part of the process. We never asked unionists to stop being unionists or nationalists to stop being nationalists, but that people would grow and change and begin to understand the other, the partner in the process. And also another very, very important learning was that everybody should leave the table with something. Nobody should leave the table defeated. And I think there, again, lessons that we really feel are very, very important for any successful peace process. Eamon spoke about support from the international community, and I think that's been hugely important in the Colombian peace process, but also absolutely fundamental to what we worked on this island. Again, Eamon mentioned the US support. It was essential before the Good Friday Agreement. It helped achieve the Good Friday Agreement, and it's been essential since then. The European Union, likewise. The very framework that John Hume brought to the Northern Ireland peace process was the framework of relationships and institutions that he saw at work in the European Union context and working so successfully. And I think we should never forget that ultimately the European Union is not simply a trade agreement or a trade organization. It's a peace process writ large, and probably the most successful peace process the world's seen. And the example of that and support from the European Union was huge. But I also recall support we drew on expertise from Canada, from Australia, New Zealand, from Finland, from South Africa. You know, when you are engaged in a peace process, people of goodwill around the world want to support that, want to be engaged, want to encourage, want to contribute. And that's really been a great part of the success with difficulties, as Eamon says, of our own peace process, and likewise in terms of Colombia. I spoke before of peace being a process, it being messy, and we still see in Northern Ireland, we're still dealing with issues that weren't fully resolved in 1998, and dealing with the legacy of the past is one where I think Colombia has shown an ability to deal and tackle that in a way, and certainly with much more speed than has been possible in Northern Ireland. And that's no reflection on Northern Ireland, just some issues in each individual peace process lend themselves to quicker resolution than others. And just at the moment, legacy is one area which I think people in Northern Ireland, political parties, victims' families are really grappling with in a very, very difficult way. That's just one example. Eamon and Dr. Emilio mentioned decommissioning, disarmament. It happened much more quickly in the Colombian process. It really stalled the peace process in Northern Ireland after 1998, and it took a good 7 years to resolve that. So, as I say, each process is different, and we can learn from and sustain each other in sharing those lessons, which are very, very important. We've come a long way in Northern Ireland. We've come a long way on the island of Ireland. There's a whole generation of young people who've been born and raised without the shadow of violence, without the threat of violence hanging over them, who reflect now on issues like climate change and global issues in a way that their parents, grandparents didn't and couldn't and didn't have the space to do. And I think that's really, really important. We see there's a culture of political engagement rather than violence or street protest. That's not to say that there isn't always the threat of some violence from some elements. But in the main, the peace process in Northern Ireland has been hugely successful in bringing in everybody into the process, leaving nobody up behind, leaving no community behind, fully inclusive, and that's really, really important. In terms of our own support for Colombia, again, it started long before we had embassies, but we've been supportive through various initiatives, like the role of Eamon and fully supporting his current role, the support of experts from our own process, like Pat Colgan, who were seconded to the Colombian Institutions for Peace, obviously our funding through the various EU and UN funds, and also our current work on the UN Security Council. So for us, it's a really important two-way process of learning and sharing and encouragement to keep on going, to work through the difficulties that are there, to ensure implementation continues, but always to acknowledge and to welcome the great success of each process compared to how difficult it was to actually get those processes up and running and get to the agreement stage. So I think it's really important, Patricia and Pat and everyone, to mark that moment of 5 years, to acknowledge the success, the progress, and to just wish you every success and every encouragement and every support for the next phase. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, very excellent. Emilio, can I come back to you briefly? I mean, you've outlined some impressive accomplishments in the process, and quite rightly. There are those, however, who would raise concerns about the pace and rhythm of the implementation. And maybe in answering that question about the pace and the rhythm of implementation, which of course is accepted that these are not exact sciences, they're difficult. And maybe to touch on Eamon's point there about what happens in many conflicts, these emergence of what we call sub-economies, and Eamon's called the drugs trade, and the challenge that presents to you. You might just take that as a question, maybe just to focus on a little.
Sure, and thank you again. In relation to the pace, I will mention three facts that I think that will be illustrative. One is I mean, the figures that had been circulating that that are taken in account in order to come to the conclusion that we are not going at the pace that it was expected, are a comparison between what we are doing and an exercise of financial dreaming. And this exercise of financial dreaming was made after the agreements were signed. What happened was, and I'm not, it is not a criticism, this is what should have been done, is that they signed the agreement, and then they incorporated the agreement in the Colombian constitution, and then they made this illusion of how much money it will be needed in order to do everything that was promised in 15 years. So they came to a figure, and that was done by the former government, and it was done by the by independent economists in Colombia. But introducing the agreements into the constitution and making this this exercise produces $0, €0. It produces nothing. So it has been this government that has had the responsibility of raising the funds in order to be able to be compliant with what was promised. Then if one looks at the national budget, we received a national budget aimed to the implementation of roughly a little bit more than 9 Colombian billion pesos. We raised that to more than 10 billion pesos in the first year, 10.5 billion, 10.3 billion pesos in the second year, and more than 10.5 in the third year. Then, as I mentioned, we have been able to invest 11 Colombian billion pesos in the PDET planning, and we received for that purpose no money. We have been able to work with the international community and cooperation, so that they focus all the efforts in our priorities. So I will say that it is that analysis that has been made is a good analysis, but there has been no argument where anybody has said in practice you could have done this or done the other this other thing in order to go faster. That is something that has not appeared. It is also illustrative that the United Nations Agency for Development, PNUD as we call them, finished a survey just last week. And this is a survey where they went to the territories. It was not made in Bogotá, not Cali, not Medellin. It was made in the territories. And in the territories in last year, the approval average raised from more or less 35% to more than 42%. This is the policy that is highly recognized in the territories, and this was even within the pandemic year. So there is a difference in perception between what, as we call them, cachacos. We call cachacos people from Bogotá, and people from Bogotá may have a view, but people in the territories are receiving a completely different view. And I will mention, to end up that what Eamon testified was really something that it's surprising, and it is very, I mean, it is a light of powerful hope for the Colombians. It was just 3 years and a half when we started to advance in serious implementation. And when we started this work, the polarization that obviously will continue around different issues, not only in Colombia, but in all around the world, in Colombia was focused in the implementation. Now you have on one side the clear leadership of President Duque that has brought the implementation to what has been remarked by Eamon and everybody. And we have an expression of former President Santos saying publicly that what the country should do after 2022 is, and I quote, as Councillor Archila has said, to build upon what has been built. So there is at this moment no political difference between most of Colombians as to the importance of continuing the implementation. There are different views as to which emphasis should be done or not. So I will say that I do agree that we all want things to go faster. We have gone very fast, and in fact, I have not received any advice of concrete and specific ways to do it. If there are, they will be in the best benefit of this government and the whole country.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Can I return maybe, and just to say to people who are joining us online, if they have maybe one or two questions, we'll have time for maybe one or two questions shortly afterwards. But the issue of legacy continues, as Fergal said, and Eamon will know this as well, our particular process. And yes, you have, in your own efforts, come to these kind of arrangements around reparation and non-repetition and so on. And there seems to be a unique approach, perhaps, on the part of the Colombian government in addressing what has clearly been a huge conflict, and yet there does seem to be more progress, at least in accepting ways through the legacy of the Colombian conflict in ways that we haven't necessarily found in Ireland. Would maybe anyone on the panel maybe take that point, either maybe Eamon even, if you want? Just on the mute there, Eamon, yeah.
Let me just make two short points, maybe before I address that question. First of all, to thank Fergal and his department and the Irish government for the support that they have given to me in the work that I have been doing, and in particular for the secondment of an Irish official to work with me all through the time that I was the special envoy. And secondly, to agree with Emilio that I think that we have reached a point now that really wouldn't have been conceivable, I think, 5 years ago. And that is the degree of political consensus that there is in the country at leadership level on the necessity to proceed with the full implementation of the agreement. And as you said, build on what has been achieved. On the issue of legacy, I think one of the differences between the Colombian agreement and the Northern Ireland agreement was that victims were involved in the negotiation of the Colombian agreement. Victims and their representatives were brought to Havana, they were sat down, they were made part of that process, and therefore one of the pillars of the original agreement, the agreement that was made in Havana, was an entire chapter on a victim-centered process of transitional justice, which included the establishment of a truth commission, a agency to try and find missing people or find out what happened to them, and then a system of transitional justice, which basically the principle was fairly simple. In other words, if you had, you told the truth about what you did during the conflict, whether you were a guerrilla or whether you were a state actor. And if you told the truth to the Truth Commission about what you did during the conflict, then you go into this transitional justice system where your offences will be looked at. There will be a sentence. It will not be a sentence in prison. It will maybe deprivation of liberty, community service of some kind, that type of sentence. But if you don't tell the truth, then you go into the normal justice system and you face the full whack of the law if you're convicted. And that system is working. I mean, all peace agreements are different, and you cannot kind of say that there's a template for one that you can kind of superimpose on another. The evolution of the Northern Ireland Agreement came up a particular way. But I think one of the strengths of the Colombian Agreement, and as time goes forward, I think we'll see that this is the emphasis on victims and the transitional justice system. Of course, as I said, the scale of the numbers of people who were killed and missing and the numbers of victims is much greater, although not that much greater if you adjust for population size. Colombia, after all, is a country of over 40 million people. Northern Ireland, less than 2 million.
Emilio, do you want to briefly address that question in relation to legacy?
Well, I do agree in the importance of having focused all of our efforts in the victims, and I will. I'm going to try to make this because I do agree with Eamon, only that it is a rather complex idea, but I'll do my best. One of the areas in which the cooperation with Ireland has been very relevant is to try to understand what needs to be so that peace will be long-lasting. And many of the first approaches that I had, and many of the conversations with many of the people in Ireland that are working with us and helping us, made an emphasis in learning how to live within the differences. So I devoted a lot of time to try to understand how that could be brought into the Colombian process. And to be very sincere, after a lot of hours of working with many people in Colombia, I came to the conclusion that we do not have those differences. And that is that's very special for the Colombian process. It is not that we do not have racial problems. We have racial problems. We have ethnic problems. We have gender problems. We have social problems, and so. But the violence has not arisen out of those differences. So in the Colombian case, once you take out the violence, Colombians are the same. People in one side and in the other side, they are the same history. They are the same the ethnic people. We like the same music. We have no possibility of having a soccer game amongst them because we all love the same soccer players. So it was very illustrative, but it makes it a little bit more complex, because then in order to listen to the victims, you really need to dedicate a lot of time to understand what is it that in particular happened for each group of them. There is not there's no the possibility of just saying no, that the big issue is ethnic, or the big issue is religious, or the big issue is historic. And so our approach has been to listen to the voice of the victims. And when I say listen to the voice of the victims, it's not it's not small or particular aspects. We have those voices embodied in the PEDET planning. This is the planning that we have made for the 170 municipalities. We went to the communities, and it was the communities who identified their necessities. One of the chapters of those plans in this with the same methodology, as robust, as detailed, as building roads, as building hospitals, as education, we have reconciliation. So we ask the people, what is it that you need for reconciliation? In the PEDET areas, we have 1/3 of the victims. 1 out of 2 people in the PEDET areas is a victim. So they spoke and they said, this is what we expect for reconciliation. Then we have the returning plans. Almost 95% of the victims are victims because of displacement. So when they go back, it's not only that we give them back the land. According to our constitutional court, we need to work with them so that the environment in which they are coming back is an appropriate environment. And then we have their voices, and we have these same voices in what has to do with collective reparation. So our focus is we need to work all so that we respond to those particular voices. So I fully agree with Eamon's approach. It has been 3 years, and now we are in the implementation stage. So we need all to abandon the romantic or the fancy area where you go to the victims and you tell them, we have signed this agreement, we are going to do this, we're going to do that. We need to focus in doing things. This is what we have been doing with the European Fund. This is what we have been doing with the MPT, the multi-party MPTF. This is what we have been advocating, so that when the transitional justice determines what is it that they are going to put the condemned people to do, that they do that. So I fully agree with Eamon. Just now we need to make this third step and decide that we're going to do this. And let me finish with this idea. And it's in deciding what to do. What is difficult is deciding what not to do. What is difficult is not to focus in this area. What is difficult is to tell everybody that wants to help, please do not do other things. Please, we need all monies, we need all efforts, we need all the support in order to concentrate in this line of reconciliation.
Pat, could I just come in at this point? Follow up on what Eamon said and Emilio. I think our own experience of some issues, and particularly I'm thinking of legacy, one learning is if you do reach an agreement, even if it's an imperfect agreement or an imperfect compromise, drive on and implement, because actually delay is not your friend. Eamon is absolutely right. In 1998, actually, victims aren't really there in the way that they should be in the 1998 agreement. That's no criticism of those who negotiated that agreement. That was of its time. But various efforts have been made since then to reach a way forward on dealing with the legacy of the past. And there was the Eames-Bradley initiative in 2009. And then obviously what we believe was a very good agreement in the Stormont House Agreement, which Eamon helped to negotiate as Foreign Minister. And that was a moment to drive on. And unfortunately, delay and political difficulties has only made the climate more difficult, not easier, to the situation where we are today. So I think delay is not a friend of a process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I think Emilio has to leave us. Am I correct, Andreas? You still there, Emilio?
Yes.
You have to leave us. Yeah. Are there one or two questions there, Andreas, before maybe Emilio leaves? Or?
Well, we have to ask Mr. Archila, how long do you have?
How long do you have, Emilio?
Like 10 minutes more.
10 minutes, okay. If there's one or two quick questions, we might put them.
Could I just say, Pat, likewise, I'm under pressure for, I have another quick question.
Yeah. Okay, maybe one question might come in. Can I address very quickly the question of peace dividends? One of the things that we have to, I think, accept in Northern Ireland was that the peace dividends didn't flow down to all of the various communities and so on. And there are many communities right across Northern Ireland who feel estranged and disenfranchised from much of the economic progress that may or may not have been made. Is there a process or a program to address that in terms of Colombia, and that the dividends of the peace process flow down to communities that were in particular affected by the conflict? Emilio or Eamon?
Well, I mean, the peace dividends are everywhere. I mean, if one takes in mind what Eamon has mentioned, and it's that I mean, what is pending is to address the coca business and the drug problem in Colombia. It is easy to come to a conclusion of how powerful the implementation has changed Colombia. In the municipalities where you have no coca, we have at this moment, almost no violence going on. There is a municipality very near Bogota that we call Apulo. Apulo is that could be 1.5 hours by car away from Colombia, and it's very near to places where people from Bogota go for the weekend and for vacations. And so there was a place where it was it was almost impossible to went before we came to we initiated the implementation, because it was completely controlled by the FARC. In that place, you have this now. You have a lot of commerce going on, a lot of agriculture going on. You have tourism going on. You have cycling roads so that people can go. And you can see see how the peace has changed the municipalities. In other places of Colombia, we have the same amount of investment. We have the same amount of economic and social progress. But we have this noise, to put it that way, and it is a noise that is arising out of violence that is caused by people that are in the drug problems. I mean, it is coca, it is illegal gold. Then, if you talk to Colombian entrepreneurs and the Colombian private sector, the good news is that there is no violence news. So at this moment, we are starting a presidential campaign. And in this presidential campaign, the war and the violence is not an issue. It's not an issue. So we have to understand that the past probably 10 or 12 Colombian presidents were elected just because of one reason: their position in relation to the violence and the war against the FARC. So it was their only concern. It was their only threat. And now, no, the implementation is an issue, but it is probably a second or third or fourth level priority. In my opinion, I hope I like my job to be the most important issue in Colombia, but it is a very good news that it is not. And the reason is because for the Colombian economy, this is something that it's getting less and less damage. If one looks at 100 families in Colombia is the size of Tumaco. So the COCA program is probably in agriculture support, technical support, the biggest program ever, independently, and that it has to do with COCA substitution. We have all the conditions so that the economies can go to those places. And in the past 3 years, the social investment in the PEDET areas were 400% higher than it was in the past. So I do think that we are seeing things happening countrywide.
Thank you. Romain, do you want to just a very quick, very quick, under pressure?
Very briefly, thank you very much for the invitation to be here to the embassy and indeed to yourselves in Glencree. Forza is a main sponsor with the Congress of Trade Unions in Ireland of the Peace Monitor operated by Justice for Colombia. And we've had some very good meetings with the ambassador to Dublin and indeed with the Irish ambassador in Bogota. I was there myself in 2019 in the last visit before the shutters came down with COVID. One thing that sticks out from the difference between Ireland and possibly Colombia is that the empowerment or the sense of participation in the peace process that exists in Northern Ireland compared to possibly the people that trade unions would traditionally represent in Colombia and across the globe. Trade unions are involved primarily out of a sense of tackling inequality and social exclusion. Violence is, in many cases, something that flows from that. And in the Northern situation, you have a political structure which embraced the various factions on a pro rata basis. Or close to that through the electoral process. In Colombia, that doesn't exist. You have a relatively, yes, there are the 16 seats and there were the guaranteed seats from Havana, but in terms of reaching out to those who feel less empowered in the political system, that is the challenge for the Colombian government, to bring people with them. And it's that I'm particularly interested in, because we would, for instance, see ourselves working with closer cooperation with trade unions in Colombia, because fortunately in Ireland, we have a better relationship with our government structure. Not that we always agree, but we're part of the social fabric of the state. We get a sense very clearly from Colombia that that's not quite the same thing. So how does the government see itself in terms of bringing people who feel to be on the margins or at the edges of society, coming closer into the center and taking part in the political process and bringing about a political change for people?
I'll have to take that as a comment on, because unfortunately our guests have to head along. Can I thank our three speakers? Can I thank Fergal from the Department of Foreign Affairs? Can I thank Emilio Archila from Colombia? And can I in particular thank Eamon Gilmore, a good friend of Glencree, and to say once again, Eamon, how proud of all we are of your efforts and your work as citizens of our country, and your role in the Colombian process, and now as the High Representative for Human Rights. So Godspeed you, and keep flying the flag. And to all of you who have joined us, a big thank you. And hopefully this will be the first of many encounters that we will have maybe in this issue. So thank you all again. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Yeah.